Alright, now that we've went through all of that, let's actually start rigging this character, shall we? Let's get started with it. Now, of course, when you load up Live2D, you will start off with this basically. Everything would be closed, the folders will be closed, you'll have the character in front of you, and you'd have mostly all of the parts out like this in the Deformer window here. The Deformer window is where you start. What I do is click on the right hand at the top, so the very top piece that's there, I click on it, go all the way down, hold down shift, and press the bottom layer there. So we have everything highlighted, absolutely everything. And then I go on automatic mesh generator. And then I go on the drop down, the preset here. I just go on standard. So we've given the character vertices. What I want to call this is like the base vertices of the character. And like I say, there will be some vertices that we're going to actually be doing manually. We're going to be creating our own vertices to do with the mouth. So I find that this is a really good starting point when it comes to making a Vtuber model. Just make the vertices, generate them automatically, and then if you have to edit them at any point, that's when you edit your own and create your own. With that done, I'm going to go ahead and click on Edit Texture Atlas. Make it whatever size you want. I like to go a bit big. In the case of your model though, it will be smaller. Just bear in mind that is intentional. It's going to be a smaller file for you because it's a practice file. So don't worry about the quality of it because you're not going to be using it for anything else other than this tutorial anyway. But generally speaking, make your Vtuber model big when you draw it. This is the size of your canvas for your atlas. If your character is quite big, and because it would be a shame if, say for example, you went with the default and you actually drew your character to be a lot bigger than, say, 1024 by 1024. Like if you made it bigger than that, you should really make it bigger. In my case, I'm just going to go ahead and make it bigger, but you probably could do with keeping it to the same width and height that this software is recommending, which is the 1024. So I'm just going to click on OK, and it sends you here. This is not a complete texture atlas, just to emphasize. For some reason, it doesn't actually put everything into a texture atlas properly. In fact, it's possible that I could have gone a bit bigger with this one, because I think maybe what it's trying to indicate here is that this is the actual size of your model, but it doesn't fit everything. This might be a good way of learning how to actually change a texture while we're here, like the texture size. To change the texture size, all you have to do is go on texture up here and then change texture size. And then you can just bring it to, I don't know, in this case it jumps to 4000, so I'll go with that. Click on it, and now I've got plenty of space. So it's worth noting that, because if for whatever reason you're like, oh no, I've gone and made it too small, or you know, it's fine, you can just change it to the next size up. But now that we have this at the right size, the right kind of size for the model and such, all we have to do is go in this list here and click on every single one of these pieces, like literally all of them, so that it's all in the texture atlas. And it's quite important that you put every single one in. And then once you have them all into the texture atlas, go on automatic layout at the top there, and then click OK. And there you go, we got everything set up for the texture atlas, and you just click on OK. And there you go, we've got the texture atlas sorted. Now this part is probably going to be the most boring part of the whole process, let's just face it. We need to put all of these pieces into their own Warp Deformers. With everything still highlighted like this, all we have to do is just go on Create Warp Deformer at the top there. We can call this particular one Rig, and click on Create. Now you'll know that you've created a Warp Deformer because you now have a bounding box with these little handles as well, and you can see that now that we've got this Deformer box, we can actually move it around and deform it. This wouldn't happen though if you didn't have the vertices, so just to emphasize the point that if you didn't have vertices and you didn't use the automatic mesh generator, or you didn't create your own meshes, you wouldn't actually be able to do this. It's quite important to have the vertices so that the deformers actually do work. It's also important to have vertices and then do the texture atlas, because it can actually cause some graphical glitches if you're not careful. You have to kind of do it in that order. So you do the vertices and then you do the texture atlas. But yeah, and also to be able to tell that you have a deformer, it's right there. It's that little 4 square green icon on the side there. And you've got like a little drop down too. So it's kind of like a folder as well. It's like I say, I tend to use deformers as well as a form of putting everything into its own folder, but they're also deformable. That's how I see the folders I have in the parts window too, or when I go to create these models, is with the mindset that each one of those folders are also going to be grouped up as deformers in the deformer window. So it makes it, the whole process, a lot easier to navigate around and actually be able to make the warp deformers. Because you probably would look at that list on the side there and think, where do I start? But this is where it helps to have the folders set in place in the parts window. Because as you can see, I've got a folder here dedicated to the hands that I've got. And I can make a deformer now, having highlighted the right hand and left hand and navigating it with the folder in the parts window. I can go on the create warp deformer and I can just make that warp deformer be called hands and create the deformer. So now I have the hands together in a warp deformer. Ideally, after that, when I go to start animating with the hands, I'd actually make their own warp deformers. So again, I could do this now even. I can make a warp deformer for the right hand. I'd call it r_hand like that. And create, and I now have my own warp deformer for the hand. And in fact, if I wanted to add a rotation to the hand though, I would highlight the deformer that I have here for the right hand, create a new rotation deformer, and I can call this right hand as well in the same way, because I did like the idea of having a rotation for it. And then I can just hold down Control and click on the center of the anchor point here. And we can drag it along like this to where the rotation would be happening on a set piece. And then hold down Alt to extend the handle if you wanted to as well. And hold down Control again on the handle to rotate it to where you want it to be as well. I tend to also, when I do stuff like this, go into the inspector window here. So let's actually bring this up so we can see it. And I go on freeze rotation, and it just freezes literally the placement that we put the rotation deformer, so we don't have any possible issues, and brings it to a default sort of state. And now we have a little rotation for the hand. I feel like I've just sort of jumped into that one, but I suppose it kind of helps to show my workflow a little bit as to how I would do this normally and why I group things up the way I do. I tend to get all the deformers done first, and then I start kind of going in and creating rotation deformers and other deformers for other individual parts once I get to actually animating them. But you know, it doesn't matter which way you do it, honestly, but this is kind of generally my workflow. The reason why I also have the rotation deformer outside as well of the right hand deformer here is that technically, if the rotation deformer was under the deformer here, so say for example I added the rotation deformer on this right hand piece so that it was also within the deformer, if that makes sense, it won't actually deform the hand at all. I lose the ability to deform the hand doing it like that, because the rotation deformer actually makes everything solid in a funny sort of way. It makes it undeformable. I may as well give you an example. At the minute, we can deform the hand normally, so we can bend it and do whatever. Now, if I try to put a rotation deformer on the right hand here, so let's just put one in here, just randomly like this, we can rotate it and stuff like that. If I try to use the right hand deformer here, I can't do it. I can't deform it. So it's why it's in that order. What it does do though, it does add a little bit of movement because it's taking on the movement of the rotation deformer, but you can't deform it. So the one way to deal with that is to do it in the order that I've done it. So I'm just going to go ahead and do it again really with this hand, because we've kind of got this into motion. We're just going to go left underscore, or L underscore in my case, hand, because it's the left hand, create. And then highlighting the deformer that we just created for the left hand, we go on create rotation deformer, make this left hand as well, like that, and create. And again, hold down the control key so that you can shift the rotation deformer to where you want it to be. And again, to rotate the handle, you just hold down control still and bring it down to where you want it to be. And if you want to extend the handle, you just go on and hold Alt on the bottom of the handle here and click and drag like this. And then once you've done everything you wanted to do, just go on freeze rotation. By the way, you can also actually increase and decrease the circle here as well, using the control and dragging on the circle here when you click. We now also have the warp deformer as well for the hand if we need to edit it as well at any point. That's an example of how you can end up finding yourself creating deformers quite easily, and how much it can be a lot of work just to put the deformers together in general. But we're going to continue on with setting up the rest of these pieces here. Like I say, I think the parts window is actually a really good way to kind of navigate where everything should be and where you should bundle things together in your warp deformer to begin with. So the next thing for me would be emotions, so I could highlight those. And the way I'm highlighting these, by the way, you can still use the shift button technically, but the problem is with the shift button is if you, say, for example, decide to highlight one of these pieces and you wanted to specifically highlight afterwards the left hand piece down here, it's going to highlight it all, isn't it? So what I do is click on what I want, in this case the rig here, and hold down Control instead of Shift, and now you can individually select pieces instead of having to highlight all of them. You can go, say for example, do the usual thing, Shift here, and then you can use Control and you can unhighlight things while you're holding down Control and clicking. And you can kind of like select as well whatever you want. This is a very helpful thing to know how to do because there are so many layers. If there are very select things that you want to select, then that's a lifesaver, quite frankly. I'm just going to hold down Control for this one, and I'm just going to highlight Sweat and Blush. They're all within their own folder that I set up earlier in the PSD file. So I just go and create Warp Deformer, and I can call these emotions. I can literally call them exactly the same as the folder itself, and just click on create. Also, make sure that you have the right layers selected. Say within a folder here, I had Sweat and Blush highlighted, but I forgot I had the left hand deformer selected. That will cause a problem sometimes when you create a deformer, but even then it's like, well, yeah, you don't really want that left hand to be in that deformer anyway. But yeah, anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. Make sure you're selecting the right things. We're going to go ahead and select on the Sweat and Blush, and then we're going to go create Warp Deformer. We're going to call this Emotions like that and create a deformer. So we have created a separate deformer for the emotions. The same way as we did it with the hands here, we can create warp deformers for these eventually if we wanted to, mostly for placement at this point, but we're not going to worry about that now. So we move down this list, the parts list here, we got left eye. We can highlight literally everything that's in here, so we can literally click on the top eyelid here and then go down to base eye, hold down Shift and click, and we can just highlight it all, and then create a warp deformer. Delete all of that because it's just a lot of words, that's all. And then call it LI or left eye, create, and we've created a warp deformer for the left eye. And then we can do that also with the right eye if you wanted to, just highlight it all, create warp deformer, get rid of warp deformer, the right eye there, just keep it as right eye and then create like that. And then again we've got another deformer. And then keep going down the list like this basically, and into every folder, just highlight everything that's in the mouth folder here, create a deformer, call it mouth, like that, and create. Then the head, I want it to be a separate deformer, so I'm going to make a deformer for the head, like that. And then keep going down the list, like this, until you have all of the deformers that you need. So this is a deformer for the antennas, create. And then we got the jelly beans part now, so all of these two parts here need to be together. So again, you can call it 1, call it whatever you want. Go down the list again, create another one, call it 2. So you're just basically doing that until you have deformers for everything. Pretty straightforward, really, stuff. Just follow the folders that you created initially. Like, you did a lot of the work at the beginning of creating the model itself by putting everything into folders and naming it as well. So now we're moving on to sparkles. So we're just going to create a deformer for this. So call it sparkles. And then we got shine as well. So we're just going to put that all into a deformer too. Great. And then do that for the body as well. Everything to do with the shadow, body, base and crosshatch. So generally called the folder body. So it's taking on the name body for the deformer. So create it. And then do the same for the back beans as well, if you want to call it that. And make a warp deformer for those two. Just like that. There we go. So in theory, we have now made a basic hierarchy of deformers here for our model that can be deformed as well. Now, I do still think that it would be beneficial, especially with the beans here, to give it its own deformer still, just so that we know what they are, because at the minute they're numbered. So I'm actually going to go ahead and highlight these deformers here, because I know that these are for the head part as well, that we called, what did we call it? Yeah, we call it jelly bean head. So what I'm going to do is highlight these deformers here, go on create warp deformer, and I'm going to actually name it that. I'm going to call it jelly bean head and create. So we now know what that is. And same goes for these ones here. So that one's called bean back. Create a warp deformer. We're going to call it bean back. I think what I tend to like to do at this point, as much as you'd think it might seem overkill, it kind of helps, and you might find yourself doing this, making lots of deformers just to be absolutely certain that you have dedicated values to it when you're working in parameters with it. In this case, I like to reserve the rig folder. It's just like I like to reserve the rig deformer as a form of making it a folder. Like, it's kind of like an indicator for me that yes, this is a rig kind of sort of visual to it. So I tend to make a deformer here as well. I highlight all of these deformers, and I'd probably, I don't know, call it rig body or something. Or I might just go so far as to call it body, but I've already got technically a deformer that says body, so. And this could end up being one of the general deformers I'd use to do like a very big edit around the whole entire model here. So any slight deformations I want to make, that's actually involving the entirety of it. And sometimes that could end up being the breathing parameter, you know. I might even rename this deformer breathing, you know, for the breathing parameter. And if you wanted to know how to rename as well a deformer, all you have to do is click on one of the deformers and go into the inspector window here where it says rig body and just call it whatever you want. So I can call this breathing, for example. But make sure you press enter, otherwise it won't work. So you can literally name whatever deformers you want. It's not set in stone, you can change it to whatever you want. So yeah, either way, that's the basic hierarchy set right now. Now, with this all set up, this is where it might kind of start throwing you out a little bit. We have the basic parameter set for everything. It's all out where it needs to be at the minute. But there's certain things I would like, for example, to be part of the head here. In this case, we have the left eye, we got the right eye, and we've got the mouth. This is where I would make another deformer and call it face, because technically we need these to be bundled together so we can actually deform those parts together when we make the X and Y rotation for the head. I'm going to call this face. And then I'm going to make another deformer. We need technically the head and face to be together, right? Because then we can move it all together, because at the minute it's just going to do that, basically. To be able to do that, we need to make another deformer. So I go and highlight face and head like this, create a new deformer, and I don't know, I might call this main head or something. Like whatever terminology that's going to help you. Let's go with that. So we got a deformer called main head, and that means we can actually move this around. Now, of course, as you see, the emotions here need to be also put into the main head. Again, this is like an example. If you forget to put stuff in and you create a deformer, it's fine. You can actually just take the emotions here, because it needs to be linked to the head and moved around with the head. Just drag and drop it directly when it highlights to yellow there with the deformer. Just drag and drop it in and it will be all linked together. There we go. Again, the antennas also need to be linked to the head too, so we need to locate the antennas, and that will go into the main head deformer too in the same way, like that. And then if we click on the main head, we can just move everything together like this. Now, the reason why it's got so many deformers is because we want to move them all. We kind of want to give them their own chance of being deformed and being either rotated or, you know, given the perspective that it needs within the angle X and Y. With a model like this though, you can get away with not having to do that much deformation. That's what's funny about it, because of it having such a round head and not as much of a sort of defined face like a human, there's a lot you can get away with, really. But there is still an element of something needing to be deformed a little bit if you want to create the impression of a head rotation that doesn't look too flat. But we will go into it a little bit as we work on this. But another thing I do like to also add, funny enough, I know this seems like a lot and there's a lot going on for the head, but it's like that's part and parcel of it, really. For the angle Z parameter here, I like to add a rotation deformer. So with the main head selected, I'll put a rotation deformer here too. So I'm going to actually call this the same as what we called it, so main head, like that. So we're going to create a deformer, and we're going to, again, hold down Control, drag it where you want it to be. I think it would be best to put it around the bottom of the head there to add like a little rotation. Somewhere probably around there. Again, you can control and drag the circle if you want it to be bigger. And highlight the handle and extend the handle so it's longer with the Alt key. Drag and click. And also, if you're wondering how I've got this sort of dragging hand sort of thing, I'm just holding down the spacebar on the keyboard for that. And now we have a general rotation there for the head. Again, I'll just freeze rotation just in case. Generally speaking, I don't think much has changed. So yeah, we've now set up pretty much the head for like some general kind of very basic movement there. So we have like a slight movement. This sort of rotation I would reserve for the angle Z parameter as well. Probably one of the easier things you can animate in this one. And with the rest here, same sort of thing. I would say you could actually highlight all of these together and you could call this main body. Like that. Click on create and there you go. Everything's in its own deformer too, and you can actually edit it without having to edit the head. That would kind of happen anyway though. If, say for example, if I dragged this in to the main body here, because of the rotation deformer, it's actually not going to edit anything. So if I was to drag the main head rotation into the main body here, which we were going to do anyway. I do think that's quite a good idea to do that. Same with the hands here. Dragging the body, dragging the hands into the main body is also part of the main body. So yeah, you know, you'll see that once we start deforming the main body here, that the head doesn't deform at all. The rest of the body does, but the head stays solid. So you can imagine, and also actually it does that with the hands too, technically. So the hands are not deforming and the head is not deforming. Now, there is a lot you could do with that. It's actually pretty cool that you have that sort of power, let's just say. It makes things a little easier if there are just certain parts that you don't like the idea of having deformed in any sort of way. In the case of the head, I certainly wanted more control over the head as far as how it deforms, which can still be achieved through directly going in here yourself and deforming the main parts here using the deformers just generally there. So yeah, you know, hopefully that makes some kind of sense. It can get confusing, but hopefully with the way that you see how I work, that maybe you can understand where I'm coming from a little bit, in the sense of like how it's broken down and how I think and how I kind of like put it together, I suppose. It's only when you see someone do it do you kind of understand exactly, especially when someone's trying to explain it to you. It's why I'm doing it the way I'm doing it for the tutorial, because I'm just kind of hoping that maybe something might kind of click with understanding the layout of things and why I do it the way I do it. But yeah, anyway, like I say, regardless, we will be going into this further as to how to rig it now. So we've done the main deformer creation, so it's technically ready for animating with the parameters now. There may still be more deformers we'll have to create along the way though, because we haven't created all of them yet, like say with the antennas and stuff like that, but that's, like I say, something that we come to when we need to. It's all part and parcel, just adding to the model as we work, in a sense, and I do find it's easier to take in as we work gradually into the model and adding deformers as we work. Yeah, hopefully that makes sense overall. Now that we've done the main deformers generally, we're going to go ahead and start animating and rigging the eyes and the mouth positions.